Thanks for coming by. This is Brian from Starlite Pulp, and here we are in episode 2 of the Starlite Pulpcast. And today I've got Nevada McPherson with me, and she is the author of this book right here, Poser. It is a neo-noir novel that kind of has a big cast and group of characters in it. It takes place in the Bay Area. You've got love triangles. You've got some S&M and dominatrix stuff going on. You've got Ambrose, the broke drug dealer, pretending to be a Stanford graduate student, and you've got Jessica, the housewife, and her son Bo. And so, whole lot going on in this novel. And so, Nevada, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you? Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So talk to me a little bit about you. You do have this pretty large cast of characters and a lot of kind of disparate angles coming together in this. How did the idea for Poser kind of come together for you?
I don't know. I was spending some time in Northern California and in Palo Alto. My husband was teaching a class there at Stanford during the summer, and I was helping out, helping students do some papers. And in the evenings, I would walk around these neighborhoods around Stanford, and I just really, it was beautiful where I was, but I was just walking around and I got inspired. And I just, I like to make up stories anyway. And I saw this image one day as I was walking by. It was this house, and I couldn't really see all the way into the backyard, but I could see like a patio umbrella and someone sitting there with this beautiful cocktail sitting there on the table in front of them. And I thought, I'm gonna put that in a story someday. And so this is the story. But I don't know. I just became fascinated with that whole area, and it just I just started to. For each year we went there. I think I kind of built on that idea over time, and finally Poser was the result.
Very cool. Very cool. And where did Ambrose come from as a character?
Ambrose kind of comes from this idea, I guess, like just going around there. I remember thinking, and it's probably changed a lot around there, around Stanford now, but you could just about go around, and there are a lot of little like hallways, doorways, kind of basements, places where if you got in there, it's almost like you kind of hang out. And if you knew your way around, you could kind of exist there. And that sounds kind of crazy, but I read a story in the paper years later where this girl had kind of just started living in the dorm and started participating in things. And then they found out later she wasn't a student there. And I was like, that's what I was thinking. But I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure it's changed a lot since then. And they've changed a lot of the dorms. They're more high rises, they're not as accessible, I guess. But I just found that whole idea fascinating. And I just kind of went from there, and he's evolved a lot just since I first thought of that character. And when I first started this as a screenplay, I had him in mind. I thought he was a pretty fully formed character then, but then I decided that there was a lot more to Ambrose's story the more I went on and kind of added. So.
Okay. And I want to touch on something you said there. This has nothing to do with Poser whatsoever. It's just, when you talked about Ambrose and the girl who pretended to be a student, right? Which is kind of like what Ambrose does in the book, right? It is interesting to me. It's one of those things because since we're both teachers, having been on college campuses, not only as a student but also as a teacher, one of the things that's fantastic about campuses, and at the same time is I find a little bit alarming sometimes, is how open they are.
Yeah.
I
was thinking the same thing. But like you said, but then it's like it's a part of the community and everything, and it's beautiful, and people come there to see it. And I guess you could, a lot of college campuses are that way. People come and visit. And just, the scenery and everything. So it's it's an attraction as well as an institution.
Right,
and, some parts are harder to access than others. Some parts are there, people can come and enjoy and look at it. And so, but yeah, it's true.
I kind of wonder how many people out there across the country are pretending to be college students.
I don't know. Probably more than we think.
Probably, yeah.
Probably more than
Probably.
we think.
Okay, so looking at Poser, there are I'm somebody who I lived in the Bay for about a decade. Okay,
Oh,
so
wow.
and there are so many different cities mentioned: Redwood City, Daly City, Palo Alto, Berkeley, and then a lot of different districts in San Francisco. In writing about all that, you said you were there for summers, right?
Yes.
So how did you get to know the Bay that well to be able to write about it?
Well, I rode the cow train, and so I kind of got used to that string of cities
Right, right.
from San Francisco to Palo Alto, and then I did go to a jazz fest in I think San Jose one
Mhm.
time, and so then I got to go beyond. I don't think I made it all the way to Gilroy,
Right,
but
right.
but just I mean, and living in New Orleans for a long time, I mean, it's New Orleans, but it's made up of a lot of different neighborhoods and
Oh
areas
yeah.
and parts of town that have their own characteristics and their own personality. And San Francisco seems to be that way as well. And I would read up on it as much as I could, and I love to look at pictures of San Francisco. When I was staying there, most of the time I didn't have a car, which well, when I went into the city, I would usually ride the train and then I would walk and ride the bus and just kind of get out and explore a lot. So I love to, and study, look at maps of where things were and stuff. So that's kind of how I got to I don't want to say know my way around because I would need a map probably, but that's kind of how I got to know different parts. And I love North Beach, so that's kind
Oh,
of my starting point. And then I would always start at a coffee shop in North Beach and then kind of go from there and find different areas.
that I think personally anyway that's the best way to actually know a city is to walk it.
I believe that to be true. And that's how, I mean, New Orleans, compared to a place like Atlanta, like a huge city, I found San Francisco for a big city to be very walkable in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways.
It
New
is.
Orleans is very walkable. And I mean, there were times when I would take the streetcar from the French Quarter to Uptown. Sometimes I would just walk.
Right.
And you go through all kinds of different, different places. There's, mid city, there's all these areas. Some of them, I mean, but it's connected. They brought back the streetcar to some parts. And so
Right.
I
Right.
see old streetcar tracks in these tiny little neighborhoods. I'm like, if only they still had that.
Right.
But,
Right.
but I love to get out and walk. And that's how I got to know Palo Alto,
Mm-hmm.
walking up and down University Drive. I love the downtown and places downtown. And so, I mean, that's how I really just walking in those neighborhoods was like just near sunset. It was just really beautiful time of day. And I was just really inspired the whole time I was there.
Excellent. Yeah, my wife and I have actually been to New Orleans, and man, what a city!
It is.
And
It
we did
is.
walk it. We really did just kind of walk
Mhm.
it and walked it down, if you would. And
Yeah,
it's I swear, New Orleans to me almost feels like you're not in America.
that is true. That
And
is
I mean
very
that
true.
in the best possible sense.
I
It has such kind of an international feel to it.
It really does.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. So
That's one of the things I love about it.
yeah, I'll bet. I'll bet. It's easy to love. I'll tell you that. So nerdy writer question here. As a fellow writer, one of the things that stuck out to me really quickly as I'm reading Poser is you wrote the whole thing in the present tense.
Yes.
Everything is Ambrose watches, Jessica sits. And if I most of the time, in fact, all the time in my writing, I almost never write about this particular time period. I'm always writing about something in the past. And so I don't know if it's because of that or anything else, but for me it would be something like, Sonny watched through his car window as the two thugs sat in the, diner and or whatever it might be, but it would always be past tense. right?
Right.
And you throughout this book, it's all in the present tense. What was the decision for that?
A lot of that comes from writing screenplays, working on screenplays for a long time. It's all in the present tense, active voice, and that's where that comes from. I think that I had gotten so used to that, that came more naturally, more comfortably, and it was a debate. I had to decide which way to go with that, because I did try the past tense, but it just kind of kept slipping back into the present tense, and so I just went with it. As Randy would say, I decided to roll with it.
That's actually really funny, because as I was coming up with some questions and some ideas that I wanted to ask with you today, and I honestly thought that was going to be your answer. Is that I thought to myself, you know what? Because she has a screenwriting background, I'll bet you it's because of that. Because
Yes.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's just it's an interesting choice, just because it's uncommon in fiction, So yeah. So what can you tell us about the second book in the Eucalyptus Lane series?
Well, it pretty much picks up where the first one, where Poser leaves off, and it'll pick up the storylines. Hopefully, it'll raise the stakes. The things, some of the things that were unresolved at the end of Poser will pretty much start off with in the next one. We'll meet some new characters. There'll be, I know there, like you said, there's a pretty large cast, but we'll meet some of the ones that have been mentioned, though, or introduced, just by mention, like Randy's mom, Ambrose's brother, who's incarcerated. We'll meet Benny and Jessica's parents and Ambrose's parents. And so it'll and the Russian storyline will develop further.
Okay.
Miss Dover's storyline will develop further. And so it'll go on. It'll pretty much start where the other one left off.
Okay. And we're staying in the Bay.
Yes, for the most part. We will take a trip to Texas, and we will return to Paris towards the end of the second one.
Okay. And Texas, that's the Ambrose angle, right?
Yes, that's Ambrose is going to go back to his home place.
Right. Okay.
Briefly.
And when first off, is it also on Outcast?
Oh yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the first book, Poser, is on Outcast Press, and the second one, do we have a title?
We're thinking Cracker.
Okay. Poser and Cracker.
Which has multiple meanings, which
Right. Certainly.
So yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
And we have a third book planned. but
okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. And any idea as to release date or anything like that?
Next spring.
Okay.
So that would be what, spring 2023? Yeah.
Spring 23. Okay.
That's what we're looking at. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe you can come back on the show at that time, and we can talk a little bit about that.
Great. I would love that.
Cool. So talk to me about your writing process, because all of us as writers, we have a process, whatever it is, right?
Yes.
I started out writing poetry for years and years and years.
Wow.
I wrote poetry. I have 3 books of poetry out, and I started out writing poetry. And funny enough, a lot of it is kind of noir-ish poetry. But I used to write pretty much every night. Like, that was what I did with poetry. I would write it. I would write at night, and I would get into a rhythm, and I do it, 5, 6, 7 nights a week. I just, I'd block out a couple hours. But with poetry, that works because most of the time with a poem, you're working on it for a night or two, you finish, you move on to the next one. That's just the way it is. Whereas writing short stories and certainly novels, it's a different process. It's a different process. And so, for example, when I wrote poetry, which I don't really anymore, but when I wrote poetry, I had this specific process at night. And I found that once I got into fiction, writing both the novel that I have and then short stories, I can't write at night. That doesn't work for me.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I have to work in the morning. Otherwise, it just doesn't get done. And there's a continuity to it. So what, for you as a writer, what works in terms of a routine for you?
Well, I think it's great to write in the morning. I used to be a morning writer. I used to get up when I was in college. I would get up super early and be one of the first ones at the coffee shop. I had just discovered cappuccino, and I would get a big cup of cappuccino and sit there for at least like 2 hours if I could, and do some writing. And then I would go to work at the bookstore. I worked at the bookstore for years at LSU when I was there.
Oh, okay.
That was great. But I felt like I was in the book loop when I worked at the bookstore. But it kind of shifted, and now I tend to be a late night writer now.
Okay.
And sometimes when it takes me a while to kind of get started, but then once I get on a roll, I hate to stop, and I tend to stay up really, really late. But like I said, I'd like to kind of switch my routine back to morning, but it's gotten harder for me to do for, I don't know. I have early classes and things like that. It's just hard for me to get up. But I tend to write maybe in longhand when I do very first draft of something, and then I type it up.
Okay.
And and then I start dealing with it on the computer. But I do, when it first comes out of my head, I tend to write it. I like to use those yellow legal pads if I can, or just any kind of lined paper.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Or just blank sheets. I've got, if you can see my floor here, I've got a bunch of my scenes all spread out in order, and a bunch of them where it's just the first. Some of them I've been working on for a while. Some of them, if I'm doing a new scene, I've been writing on just unlined paper, just typing paper. And I find that, like, when I look at them in succession, my writing's kind of going up. I think that's supposed to be, if you're feeling pretty good. But then I go back and I find, I change stuff around. It gets so messy that I'm probably the only one who could make sense of it. And sometimes that's even hard for me. And then I know it's time to, I need to really get this typed up so that, I can work on it further.
That is, honestly, that's amazing. I go straight from thought to keyboard. I don't write a thing on paper. And in fact, what you just said cracks me up, because I'm not kidding. If I wrote it on paper, I don't think I'd be able to read it.
I can't, when I try really hard, I can have okay handwriting, but it's just enough, scratching enough just to tell what was I thinking. And then, like I said, then when I start to draw lines and I start to write on the back and I mark through and I have lines going, then it gets a lot harder. So then it's like, to even make sense of it, to see what I've got to type it up on the keyboard.
Right. Okay.
But since I do have a lot of plot lines and stuff, I kind of have to have it like some visual medium. I've got an outline, sticky notes and all that, but I have to like print it out and put it all, or in handwritten or on printed sheet, just lay it all out on the floor or on some big flat surface, just to kind of keep it straight.
Interesting.
So that's what I've got over here right now.
And do you write out? You mentioned an outline. Do you write out an outline before you start writing?
I haven't always. I think I got more into like structuring things as I work on screenplays.
Sure.
But this one, I did work from an outline, and I have an outline for the next, the book I'm working on, and it helps me a lot to just keep track of my different characters and what's going on and where people's paths cross. But that doesn't mean I don't allow for things to change, because if something changes, that there's room for that. I'll change it up. If a character does something that I didn't expect this character to do, but it's true to them, it works, then I'll just change up the outline.
Yeah,
make it work.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with that too, because you do. Despite how diligent and structured of an outline you might have, sometimes you'll be writing a scene, and all of a sudden, it'll just kind of go off in a different direction.
Yes, it does.
And you didn't have that written down, but that's okay,
But that's okay. That's the muse. That's inspiration striking. Leave room for that. I think that's, you have to, I think.
Yeah, you have to have. that kind of flexibility, I guess, right?
Yes, yes.
So excellent. Okay. So when you're writing, do you are you somebody that once you get started with something, you have to finish it, like you are working on it every day kind of thing, or is it something where you can work for 3 days in a row and then take a few days off and then go back to it, that kind of thing?
Wow, that's a good question. It depends. If I'm really on a roll, then I can't wait to get back to it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's kind of like at the end of a section or the end of a chapter, and then I'm kind of got to regroup for the next thing, I might take a couple days, but generally I like to, once I really get rolling, I like to just keep it up, like keeping that habit every night, if at all possible. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
I feel like it's going to be that way for about the next month. And so, but then I do have to take like a moment to let it cool. I say let it cool off. Like a draft, I feel like, okay, and it's like, well, this is fine. But then I wait a day or two, then I look back at it and I'm like, I see some things I need to change.
Sure.
And so I like to do a draft, let it cool off and come back to it.
Sure. Yeah. Cause there's an aspect to writing that's so interesting, because there's a quote by Philip Roth, right? Who's a wonderful writer, obviously. Not a noir pulp writer,
Mm-hmm.
but
Okay.
wonderful writer. But one of his quotes is, "Some of us wait for inspiration, the rest of us just get to work." And it's one of those little lines where, it's a little bit of a, stab at those of us that sit around for weeks waiting for the next great idea.
Yes.
But
in the mood.
right. Yeah, exactly. But there is some truth to that, because
Yeah.
when you're on a project, you just have to knock it out. I mean,
Yeah.
So, do you? There's a James Lee Burke, Dave Robichaux novels, and obviously down in Louisiana, the majority of them. Great writer, but he said something, I think, that was really interesting, because they asked him about, and I don't know if he was being facetious or not. I have to assume he was, but I don't know, maybe not. But they asked him about the process of writing a book, and he said, well, the first thing to do is to write a great sentence and then follow it up with another one. And while that's completely true, I can't imagine that's actually how he writes his books. I mean, because you know what I mean? Because most of us need that outline, that tells us where we're going in chapter 2, not just writing it. So it's always interesting to hear. The one fascinating thing about writing to me is that every writer has a different process, and whatever works for them, and that doesn't make it wrong, and it doesn't make it right. It's just, if it works for them, it works for them. And it's kind of a fascinating thing, because there are so many disciplines in life where you kind of have to do it one way, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a process and you have to do it this way. This is the right way.
Yes.
With writing, there really isn't. I mean, it's one of those things that it's whatever works for you.
It is. It's kind of intensely personal and individual, and maybe it comes from a different place than something, some other types of disciplines. I don't know, or just you're dealing with, well, not that you don't do that in other things too, but emotions. And I read a thing one time that it was talking about the difference between writing, like creating or writing a draft, and editing. And it talked about how, if you're a writer, like you're trying to create something out of nothing, you're trying to create a world or characters. And it's like they compared it to like putting paint on a canvas, like that's what you're doing, you're adding to. And then in the editing process, editing is more like sculpting. You're taking away what doesn't need to be there and kind of shaping it up just like you want it. And so that kind of helps me when I think about it, because it's like you can get to, like when I'm writing, I try to allow myself, and I just keep reminding myself it's a first draft. no matter how it comes out, you
Right.
can go back and work on it. It's not
Right.
going to be like this always.
Right.
You know, there'll be some good and some bad, but you can go back and work on it. And that kept me going, especially through writing Poser. I was just like, just keep going forward, just keep writing it down, put what you believe would happen, needs to be there. You can always go back and work on it. And I can't remember if it was Nora Ephron. I read a quote not long ago, or no, maybe it was somebody else, but it said you can go back and fix, a bad draft. You can't fix a no draft, kind of thing. So
without
letting
question.
yourself have permission to just do what you do and then go back and work on it helps me a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is one of the cool parts about writing it. It's also one of the frustrating parts about it is that you can feel in a way like it's never quite finished.
Yes.
Because you always can go back and tweak little things, change things with this character and or this description, or all of a sudden you want to change a name. All that's it's also malleable,
It is.
You play with it. So so it's one of those, catch-22s, because it is cool that you can do that, but at the same time, you can go back 5 years later and go, did I really finish that?
Yes. I don't know if it's true, but I had heard one time that's why it's hard to find like a definitive version of some of Tennessee Williams' work, because he would always, even after it was published, he would go back and change little things,
Yep.
Maybe in another edition or something like that. Like
Yep.
he would find things he wanted to change. And so I'm like, I can see how that could happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because you have A Trunk Full of Zeros, which is my novel
Yes.
from a few years ago. And what's interesting about is Starlite Pulp is going to put that out next year as a reissue. And what's funny is I'm actually going to go in and change some things.
Okay.
So,
wow.
You know what I mean? It's already been published, and I'm like, yeah, I want to change that. So
okay, that's amazing.
There's nothing stopping me. So
yes,
there'll be some differences from one version to the next. But
that'll be interesting to know. I'll have to take a look at both.
So talk to me about you have an MFA from LSU, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Is it in writing with an emphasis on screenwriting?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, it's creative writing
okay.
with an emphasis in screenwriting.
Okay. So yeah, because I had mine's from USC and it's an emphasis in fiction and poetry. So
okay.
But talk to me about it. So you have done film work in the past.
Well, I've written a lot of screenplays.
Okay.
I mean, I've entered them in contests. They've done pretty well. Some of them have done really well in contests. They haven't been produced. The one that's been produced, I made a short.
Well, that's
but that's the goal. I'm gonna keep at it, and
okay.
I keep revising. And I'm always glad to see one place. It's different. Screenwriting is a different kind of writing because it takes a lot to get a feature screenplay made.
Yeah.
And I know for some people it happens really quickly. For me, it's taken a while, but I feel like I've learned all along the way. I've learned so much, and I really enjoy screenwriting as just a form of writing. And I had Poser started out as a screenplay. It was called something else, but it did start out as a feature-length screenplay. And the screenplay ended, let's see, we're a third of the way through, maybe, where the novel, out there. And so I realized later, and it had done okay in some contests. It had gotten some good comments, but I felt like after looking at it, for a while, I started thinking of ways that it could expand beyond that. And so that's where the novel kind of comes from. I was going to try to adapt it and I still am working on like a pilot script, like a TV series for it. And it was through doing that and learning more about that process that I decided I'm going to try it as a novel. And plus, it was coming up on November. I don't know if you're familiar with that NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month, where people try to get the first draft of a novel in the month of November. And so I thought, I'm going to use that to try to get a draft. And so that's what I did. And I thought, well, how hard can it be to adapt, from the screenplay? But it was hard. It's hard to adapt from one form to another. So you have to just think of it as a whole new thing. And so I just went in, and all the things that you can't show, on the screen or whatever, I just went into people's thought processes, backgrounds, memories, freakouts, all the kind of stuff that it's hard to kind of convey, strictly visually. I started writing the novel, and it went way beyond what I thought it would. And it got really long. And so part 2 was originally, it was all going to be one just long novel. But I decided to do it as a series because I knew even beyond that, there would at least be one more. And so that's how I kind of decided to make it into a series.
Okay. And so the screenplays that you've written in the past, what kind of stories have they been? Have they been noir also, or are they kind of all over the?
They're kind of all over. I did, like you were saying, you write about stuff in the past. One of them, the one that's probably done the best in contest so far, is called Piano Lessons. And it's a gay teen romance set in the rural South in the 1950s.
Okay.
And so also I adapted that into a graphic novel too. But the screenplay I've worked on for a long time, but it's done pretty well. And then another period piece that I wrote, which I decided to do that as a novel, and I'm still working on that. Is one on the life and times of Erich von Stroheim, the silent film, director.
Okay.
And he played the butler in Sunset Boulevard. Most people probably remember him from that. But I was preparing a lecture for my film class at Tulane. We were looking at film noir, and we were going to watch Sunset Boulevard. And so I was doing some notes for class, and I was looking up all kinds of stuff, Sunset Boulevard is one of my all-time favorite movies. But I found all this stuff about Erich von Stroheim and his life and history, and it was just really fascinating to me. And so I did a lot more research on him. And so I wrote a screenplay based on his life, and then I wrote the novel, but I need to go back and work on it and edit it some more.
Gotcha. Actually,
Silent Hollywood era I find really fascinating. But then there's, like, if you are trying to describe things, it's like, well, what did things look like, on a movie set in early Hollywood? So another one, I wrote a screenplay based on the life of Jack Kerouac years ago. So I want to get that back out, take a look at that sometime.
Very cool. Yeah, I had a pretty distinct Beat and Kerouac phase there for a while, so I'm pretty familiar with that.
Yes.
So Sunset Boulevard was actually just on TCM a few days ago. They had a little William Holden showcase. So they had 8 or 9 movies back to back. Yeah.
Yes. And I love him in Network. I mean, I'm a William Holden.
Yeah, that was on too. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so talk to me about you teach a film noir basics course.
Yes. It's a very, very short bite-sized course. If you subscribe on my website, I'll send you a link. What I want to do is develop some other courses on different topics around film. This is the first one I've done, so I'd like to get people's feedback. I'd really like to know what people think about it and maybe what people would like to see more of. But it goes into just kind of what is film noir. And it kind of talks about some of the motifs around film noir, and character archetypes and things like that. And it has some little quizzes you can take, after looking over the materials, and some I have a checklist of, and there's so many that you could name that would be great, but I'm kind of I made a list of some of my favorite films noir, and of some of the motifs that you can, kind of be on the lookout for, and character archetypes and things like that, just to kind of reinforce some of that. Because I think that's really fun to look at in film noir. I mean, there's things that, are true across film language, but then noir has its own kind of thing going within that. And then even within the world of noir, there are different types of films noir. And so, like so to me, Sunset Boulevard is one of the greatest Hollywood noir. And then, like
Okay.
in that category, you could look at, The Bad and the Beautiful, I think, and several others, I'm sure. But, I would like to maybe do some little short courses as well, or maybe even some longer courses on, looking at genres, subgenres, and things like that.
Okay. Okay. So since we're talking film noir, I had the Out of the Podcast guys on a couple weeks ago, and
Mhm.
they really know their stuff, and they're 82 or 3 episodes in, so they've done 80
Wow.
plus noir films, right? Where they break down one a week, and so they were
I've got a
throwing out
lot to
movies,
catch up on. See what
right?
they say.
Exactly, yeah. And so and they pretty much only deal with like early to mid 40s to early 60s. So
My
and
favorite.
they still have a ton to go. So there's just so many
Wow.
of them. But
There's so many.
what would you consider maybe, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but maybe top 3 noir films from any time period? What would be some of your top?
Well, once again, Sunset Boulevard is one of my favorites.
Okay.
Oh gosh, this is hard because there are so many that
There
I
are so many.
like. It's hard to narrow it down. I also like. I like Maltese Falcon.
Okay.
And The Big Sleep. And there are just so many. There's one I don't know if it's considered, I guess it's kind of considered one of the earlier or kind of influences on French New Wave, but it was mentioned on Noir Alley, with Eddie Muller. Bob Le Flambeau. It's a French film, I believe, from the 1950s, and I'm a big fan of that film too. As a noir, I'm going to write an essay on that for my blog soon. But those are some of my top ones that I just enjoy, looking at the archetypes. I love the Detour is another one. I think that one's gets a mention in Poser. That's another one I like.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to name a definitive top 3. I know I keep going on, but Sunset Boulevard, I've probably seen the most. I've seen literally countless times. I could not count the times I've seen Sunset Boulevard, and I've watched it with a lot of my classes too. And it's always interesting to see how, how students respond to it, and we have discussions about it. Whether Joe Gillis is, like the patron saint of screenwriting, stuff like that, what they think of Joe Gillis. Some of them have a lot of sympathy for him. Some of them are like, he's terrible anyway. He had it coming. I'm like, no.
Right.
And then that movie, The Player, they reference Joe Gillis a lot in that. So.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Yeah. It is hard because, we think of noir as one thing. Like you think of Mitchum, or you think of
Bowden. Yes, I was going to say Out of the Past too is another one. That's another great one.
It is, yeah. It is fantastic. But there are so many noir films that are even, like, for example, last year Nightmare Alley was out.
Yes, I haven't seen the new one, but the old one is fascinating, and I want to see the new one.
Yeah, and it's very much a noir film. It is. Mm-hmm. It's gorgeous to look at. Mm-hmm. Del Toro did a great job with the way that it looks. It's tremendous. Wow. But the point is that we're still making them, even though some of them, like say Poser, right, is set in present day, and then we still have the ones obviously like Nightmare Alley that was something out of the 40s and 50s. But it is interesting because it's a genre that has really kind of I don't know, to survive now for a long time.
Yes.
You go back and there are so many great French films that are noir, and then you have the American films, the 40s, 50s, you also have the British films, and they're something else. But at the same time, you have the modern noir too, because the elements, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the one that teaches the class, but the elements of noir that make it noir in a lot of ways is you have scarred, difficult people making bad decisions.
Yes.
almost in any era, right?
Yes, that's true. And yeah. And I think that's why it stays vibrant. It stays, it's a constant. There's so many stories out there to be told that deal with that. And
Yeah.
I think there's just always a place for it.
There is. And that's kind of why I think in the last, say, decade, maybe decade and a half, rural noir has really kind of taken off as a subgenre, because again, it's about damaged people making questionable decisions, and you can do that in a trailer park in Arkansas just as easily as you can do that in the back alley of San Francisco.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And it's, hard times. I mean, it might be the whole thing of circumstances, decisions you make in the moment, and what you have to do, what you have to do, the situation you're in, things like that. So.
And then the consequences from those.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and finish up here. The next on Starlite Pulpcast, in 2 weeks, I've got Johnny Boyd coming on, who is a kind of swing crooner and singer extraordinaire. He was a lead singer of Indigo Swing and is now a solo act. He has also something that we're going to chat about for sure is he is kind of a purveyor of retro culture and has 9,500 neckties. He must have
amazing.
they must have their own room, because 9,500, and they're the belly warmer types, the type that just kind of go to the belly button. So anyway, so I'm gonna have Johnny on in a couple weeks. That's gonna be a lot of fun. If you have the opportunity, pick up Poser wherever books are sold, which isn't all that many places these days, but certainly Amazon and Barnes and Noble and online. And so pick up Poser. It's worth the read. Nevada, thank you so much for being here. And
thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And everybody else, I will see you in 2 weeks. Nevada, hang out for a minute. Bye.
In this topsy-turvy